Good evening and welcome to episode 266 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamandungwa Khumalo. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the show. You've missed out on some great episodes, so do make sure that you go to our Facebook or our YouTube page to catch up on all the great property content that we have brought to your screens. And to all our regular viewers on Facebook, on YouTube, also on Instagram, welcome back. You know how we do it. Every single weekday at 7 p.m., you and I have an appointment where we tackle a hot property topic that helps us navigate our property journey. Doesn't matter whether you're a tenant, a landlord, you're looking to buy, to sell, or to build. This is the Property Podcast that comes to your screens every single weekday and helps you on your journey. It's the only daily property talk show in South Africa, so you know that we make sure that we bring the best guests to help us along the way. Now, talking of, bringing people on platforms who help us along our way. We, of course, also have other great shows across the private property social media platforms who help us navigate other aspects of all things relating to property. Later on this evening, you can catch award-winning farmer Umbali Nwoko on the Farming Podcast, tackling agricultural issues. She's actually going to be speaking to one of my favorite women in agriculture. They're going to be unpacking agricultural tours. Uligo of Made with Rural. I've been following her work and her career over the past couple of years and really love the work that Made with Rural does. So do make sure that you catch that podcast later on at 8 p.m. And every Wednesday, Esther Claassen brings you the First Time Home Buyers Show, where she is always in conversation with buyers, certainly investors who've gone from buying that first property to growing their property portfolio from strength to strength. So if you want to learn a thing or two about how they did it, then that is a show that you want to make sure that you are tuned into. And every Mondays and Fridays, Chad keeps you company on the Home Shoppers Show, where he's always profiling incredible homes. I saw yesterday that 17 million rand property that he gave us a snapshot of. So if you've missed that one, it is up on our Facebook page as well as on our YouTube. Well, those are some of the great shows that you can catch across private property social media pages. So do make sure that you follow us across those pages. You can also follow myself at Zamandungwa_K as we continue the conversation on all things matter on social media. Now, this evening, we're going to be looking at something that I know a lot of landlords in particular probably have a bit of sleepless nights about, but it's something that you probably don't have to have sleepless nights over. And of course, we're looking at how you can better optimize your rent collection. So if you're a landlord and you're currently struggling with rent collection, well, we're going to be in conversation with the CEO of Rentmaster and look at ways that they're making rent collection easier and certainly gives you peace of mind at the end of the month. And of course, the CEO is Shanaaz Trethewey. There's somebody that we've had on the show before. Last time I spoke to Shanaaz was late last year, so around November. Shanaaz, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to join you again.
I think, Shanaaz, let's start with viewers at home who may not be aware of what Rentmaster is and the work that Rentmaster does. I mentioned that we last spoke in November. I mean, a bit later on, we'll get a sense of how the markets changed from the last time we spoke. But for those at home who are not particularly familiar with Rentmaster, perhaps take us through the work that Rentmaster does.
Rentmaster is a rental collection agent, and we've been around for the last 20 years, assisting landlords in collecting their rent. via debit order. And what we do is effectively we collect from tenants, and until recently, our cash flow products provided them payment on the first, while we followed a debt collection process in the event of tenants not paying. And the debt collection process entailed us sending those vital letters of demand for the landlords and ensuring that they were in the best position to take legal action should eviction need to take place. So it was really holding their hand through the financial rental collection process.
And I think, when I reflect around when we last spoke, Shanaaz, last year, we're looking at how a lot of the tenants had slowly sort of recovered from the effects of hard lockdown. Some of them were able to slowly find their feet and be able to start paying the landlords back, certainly even pay back the rental agreement or the payment agreement rather, that they'd entered with their landlord. But we are now in the new year, already in quarter 2 of the new year. Perhaps share with us some of the trends that you've seen in the new year when it comes to rent collection and also just tenant behavior when it comes to their payment of rent.
So just to rewind, as you said, last year was obviously a very unique year. What it did is it threw us into a situation where we didn't know how people were going to pay their rent during hard lockdown. And we saw unprecedented levels of our good standing ratio, what we call our rental good standing ratio. That is people paying on time or people paying late. We're talking about tenants. And if they did not pay, we knew that landlords were going to be compromised. During hard lockdown, we offered what we called rental recovery plans. And this was brought about, and it was a very quick response, market response by TPN to bring these rental recovery documents to us. And we helped landlords negotiate with their tenants on how they could use their deposits, how they could have rental reductions and subsequently recoup this rental as affordability recovered. We then ticked along and we got to October last year. And when we saw in October, these repayment plans started kicking in. And the reality of affordability started to set. A lot of double income groups, because of COVID, actually went to single income groups. Sole proprietors, their businesses were compromised, and they couldn't get to the previous levels of affordability. And so landlords now needed to start making very difficult decisions on what rental they could continue accepting and what tenants could continue to afford to pay. So it was a very difficult time. And right now we are in a situation where landlords continue to find difficulty in getting those same affordability rates.
And if you're watching us at home, I am this evening in conversation with the CEO of Rentmaster, and we're looking at how you can better sort of optimize your rental collection, and certainly looking at how Rentmaster is making it better for you to be able to collect your rental and really saving you time and money as a landlord at the end of the month, because most of us who've been landlords can also understand the pressures of being on top of your admin when it comes to your tenant management, particularly if sometimes you haven't automated certain things, and sometimes even if you have automated it. I think the nature of managing tenants is admin intensive, and perhaps as a landlord you want to find different ways to cut down on the admin that is coming through on your end. I want to find out from you at home, if you're a landlord, what have been some of the strategies or tools you've used to I would say respond to what COVID has pushed us into, because the reality is we saw what happened last year during the hard lockdown and slowly recovering from the hard lockdown and almost having to rethink how you're managing your portfolio in different ways. We saw certain landlords, for example, not increasing rentals for the new year or for the end of the lease, whenever that lease agreement ended. We saw certain landlords even decreasing rental by a small margin in order for their tenant to still be able to afford to live in that particular property, because we'll always talk about the importance of managing a good tenant well and making sure that you take care of your tenants, because ultimately your tenants are your customer. And regardless, actually, if perhaps they're not a particularly great tenant, they're still a customer, and you as a landlord are providing a service, and you still want to be as professional as possible during that time. So do share with us down here below, how have you navigated your rental collection woes at the end of the month? Because we have seen that certain areas have been harder hit than other areas, unfortunately. So as a landlord, have there been different strategies that you've tried to put in place that have helped you make sure that you maintain your high rental collection, or certainly perhaps even improve your rental collection if you've got quite a number of tenants? Do share down here below. I see some of the members who are already tuned in and watching Ugoso Khumelo on Facebook, Kevin Mashio on Facebook and on YouTube, Katle Homoji, I see you. Thank you very much for tuning in and signing this evening's register. Now, Shanaaz, I want to come back to you because I think one of the things that landlords are now probably thinking is, well, I do have this, this property. I do have my, tenants, and there are different ways that landlords have been able to adapt. And we'll speak a little bit about that later on. I think now what I'd certainly want to get a sense of from you is, what are landlords doing slightly differently in this new year than what they were doing last year? Because I can imagine different landlords entered all sorts of different agreements, last year, and perhaps some of them thought, and I know with some of them, they hadn't, for example, used the rental pack that, the rental recovery pack that TPN and SSLR had put together. Perhaps some had verbal agreements with their tenants only to get themselves burnt because, the tenants wasn't able to honor that particular agreement. So what are landlords now doing slightly differently than the way they manage their portfolios, particularly in Q3 and Q4 of last year?
So if we look at, and that's a very good question, because it goes back to how landlords wanted to support their tenants. And once they started realizing that the percentages of their recovery was still not what they had previously. So if I look at the second quarter, the good standing ratio during hard lockdown was in the low 70s%. So you're looking at 72%. And that is only residential properties, never mind commercial landlords. And when we look at by the fourth quarter, you're looking at a recovery only to 77%. That means 1 out of every 4 tenants at the end of the month had not paid. So it seems from our perspective, with us being about 15% above that collection at Rentmaster, having a 90% recovery and good standing ratio, it seems that is very low. And you don't want to be that landlord, that 1 out of the 4 landlords that is waiting for that money at the end of the month and not have it come in. Because at the end of the day, people are investing in properties for wealth creation. They're doing it because that is their chosen investment approach. They're doing it so that they can have an alternative stream of income. And when a tenant isn't paying, what you end up having is you're having to bank on money and then regain on your own obligations, affecting your own credit profile. So you're not creating that wealth. So what landlords have realized is that they've become an inadvertent financier to their tenants, and they are stepping back from having to do that. And we are facing them having 2 different sets of tenants. Tenants that previously could afford the rent, but are facing the option of being able to invest and becoming first-time buyers because the economy and the interest rates have dropped. And their alternate, the other group, are people with less than ideal credit records. And those tenants need to start rehabilitating their credit records and positively reinforcing their profiles by paying their rent on time. And that's where Rentmaster has been supporting our landlords by uploading the data into TPN, and the positive payment profiles have been assisting in ensuring that landlords are being vigilant in getting the rental, and they're relying on us a whole lot more.
Excuse me, I know, Shanaaz, I think one of the things that we've certainly picked up, and this is not just from our conversation, but a number of other conversations that I've had with other guests previously is, and you've pointed this out, that we're seeing a significant number of tenants becoming homeowners because of the low interest rates. And the reality is there is quite a substantial free stock on the market, I'll say that, in terms of rental properties that are available. And we've seen some landlords, for example, trying to maybe decrease their asking price in terms of rental. So there's a lot of tenants find themselves being spoiled for choice in terms of where they can go. So those who are perhaps not looking at buying at all right now, they're still very comfortable with renting. And there's been certain instances, for example, where you've even seen tenants in the same building that they live in almost want to see if they can move apartments because rent is slightly cheaper there, and saying to their landlord, listen, same apartment block, same spec as mine is charging 800 Rand or 1,000 Rand less. If you can match that, I'll stay. Otherwise, I'll be giving notice and I'll be moving over to that apartment. So given that there is essentially quite a lot of competition, particularly for quality, tenants, because now landlords are also competing for quality tenants who will be able to afford and consistently pay their rental. And just given how tenants themselves are spoiled for choice, how do they navigate that? Because I don't see that changing anytime soon. We're going to see more homeowners, which is fantastic for people who are able to access that home ownership market. So what does this mean essentially for landlords? Because they're seeing that, with some of them seeing that their properties are staying vacant for slightly longer, even when they decrease their asking price a little bit.
So there are two things that we've been encountering, and one of them is exactly that. To remain competitive, one needs to understand how to make your property more attractive. And so we look in the market and we've noted that rentals are de-escalating. There are very few individuals that are being able to escalate their rent. And in many cases, those have been very optimistic. And so what we find is that there's de-escalation and they are improving the quality of their properties to remain competitive. It is a tenant's market, and that means that tenants are spoiled for choice. If there is something next door that is better equipped for a lower rent, they are going to move across. We've had constructive conversations both with landlords and tenants, and landlords need to understand what is their baseline rental, what are they going to be charging. Because at this point in time, many of them need to understand what is their base overhead costs, what are their bond payments, understand what debt they're trying to cover, and start there as a starting point, just to maintain their own selves ticking along. And from that point of view, they can then negotiate their rental. So we are having those constructive conversations. But now we need to take a step further, and we need to understand that even if you are going to be placing a tenant, we understand that there are good people out there. We have many landlords coming to us. They say, look at this individual. They fell onto hard times. They are a good family. They are good people. And this is a story I think we all hear. Unfortunately, COVID sent them into a situation where they have a less than ideal credit score, and we'd like to place them. At this point in time, what we need to do is we need to understand that you have put the right documentation in place. That's what's going to stand you in good stead. Right up front, do all of the right documentation. Put your lease agreement in place. Agree on the terms and conditions, because this allows you to take action if things don't go according to plan, despite good intention at the beginning. Thereafter, it's about how you collect your rent. So what is your preferred rental collection option? And you want to know that you aren't left with the person right at the end having everyone else had their debit order collect. And with the last bit of money that they have in their bank account, they're going to make your EFT. So now we're saying to landlords, what is your preferred rent collection method? And it really should be debit order, just as all of your other service providers and credit providers are getting in there. EFT should be your secondary method of collection. And this is how we're making differences and inroads for landlords to have a better success and recovery given their tenant base.
Shanaaz, as you're speaking about the conversations that you're having with landlords and also part of the service that you provide for landlords, one of our viewers on YouTube, Umziwake Tsakwane, has actually asked how Rentmaster works. So almost take us through, if you are a landlord right now and you're looking for a rental agency, how is Rentmaster working from the moment of I have this vacant apartment, or my apartment is going to be vacant in the next 2 months and I want to be working with Rentmaster? What would then be the Rentmaster journey with that particular landlord and the different services you offer from the moment you would source the tenant right up till perhaps when the tenant vacates? Perhaps just take us through that snapshot so that he can get a good sense of how Rentmaster ultimately works.
So Rentmaster has evolved over the years. So where we began is people would call in and say, I've got a property that has already individuals that are occupying it, and I would like ease of collection. And at this point in time, we would interact with them and understand how we could bring them on board. At this point, what we understand from landlords is that many of them have procurement agents. So any landlord would go about engaging with a procurement agent, or even themselves procuring and meeting the tenant. Many people have properties on their own or annexed to their homes, and they want to know who's going to be living in that property. They end up having a personal relationship with their tenants. And what Rentmaster does is we receive the vetting documentation. We provide all of the documentation you need. So you would call us and say, look, I would like to use Rentmaster. We would then load and check all of those that you really own the property. This is your deed, etc. And that's very quick and easy. Thereafter, we receive the documentation, which is an application form. You don't need to have a look at that. We then review it. And right now, at this point in time, Rentmaster has evolved to have different products. They are cash flow products and they are easy collect products. Easy collect product means that from our association with TPN Credit Bureau, we allow landlords to have a rent book profile. Every landlord should be having a financial lease management system. Why? Because you want to be able to invoice your tenant. You want to be able to evidence what they owe and have statements, send them their SMSs, etc. Rentmaster helps you create that rent book profile. You then load your properties and it comes directly into our environment at the click of a button. And what we do is when we enable for 165 Rand, those debit orders direct from your tenant's bank account. That is Rentmaster Easy Collect. If the landlord says, wait a moment, I do not want to wait for that debit order to clear and then only move my bond payments to the 10th as opposed to the 7th when we pay, what we do is we would vet a tenant and help you scrutinize those documents. And those are our cash flow products. So Rentmaster would review, do a credit check on your behalf to have a look at the payment profile information. We work with it every day. We can see how people are honoring their rental in conjunction with their other credit payments. Based on that, what we do is we have a look at your pay slips and the bank statements to see, can they really afford the payment? And we provide you feedback. We then hold third-party deposits on your behalf. So your tenant is assured that we actually are holding it and we treat it in terms of the legal process. We perform debit orders in this case in our cash flow products on the 1st and we pay you on the 1st. In both products, what happens is if a tenant defaults, we then have a debt collection team, and that team will then call your tenant and say, you are owing, because rent was due and payable according to the lease documentation, which we provided. It is from SSLR and TPN and widely recognized. It was due and payable on the 1st. If they don't pay, we are still going to issue the letter of demand and ultimately help you along that legal process. And this is our affordable solution. We take away that financial administration and that vigilance that you need to follow up when non-payment takes place.
We're taking more of your questions and comments at home. We've got a great one coming through from Facebook. Got Leho Moji asking how to price your apartment, considering that you still need to pay levies and taxes. Do you recommend that you include that in your rent or your repayment? And that's such an interesting one, right, Shanaaz? Because I think a lot of landlords right now, particularly those who probably haven't been landlords for a very long time, are finding that the escalation that we're seeing with levies eating into your bottom line. And I mean, I saw that, for example, even COJ is going to be increasing their tariffs with electricity and even water. So they're escalating prices from almost every front. And rental, unfortunately, isn't escalating at the same percentage as all these other costs. How can landlords almost mitigate that for themselves?
So it goes about how you're costing your investment. And if we have to have a look at it, when you're entering that agreement, many people should understand that there are very evident costs, meaning your bond payment, because you've procured a bond to buy an investment property if you didn't have the cash, as well as hidden costs. So when you go in to buy a property, because now you can buy more affordable properties and actually grow your investment, you need to have a look at what are the levies in the area. You need to have a look at what are the costs for running the electricity, maintenance, all of these various different charges. And that is where valuation reports also become very important. It's about who else in the area is also renting their property, what are they selling it for, and what are people paying. And that is when you use what we call a rental index. We use the TPN property valuation report, which has a very valuable rental index, and it gives you a comparison to what others around you and what you're competing with. What are they charging for the rent in the area? And that way you've got a benchmark. Now, when it comes to costing your own rent, you need to understand your affordability. And that is where it comes to good budgeting. So you understand what your bond is, and you understand what your hidden costs are after doing your research. And obviously you add it up. You then have to provide for what you can charge, and then whatever it is that's a shortfall against your own personal budget, so you don't fall behind and affect your own credit score. So it is a matching of what you've got, also providing for times when you could stand vacant, okay, as well as your base overhead, which is made up of evident and hidden costs, and doing your research by going onto private property, by getting the TPN valuation report and understanding all of the different factors of what you can charge from a rental index point of view.
Shanaaz, before I wrap up and I let you go, I mean, what final words would you then say to landlords, given where we are right now in 2021 and just having seen some of the trends that you've observed in the past year and perhaps even some of your projections for the new year? How should landlords be looking at managing their property portfolio right now? Because I know some of them are feeling slightly overwhelmed, and perhaps even those who are looking to become landlords, for them to almost look at this as you need to be able to be mindful of this, expect it, and if anything, plan for it, right? So it doesn't catch you off guard.
So what I've been saying to everyone around me is, be aware that we are in new times. We really are expecting, if you are expecting things to go back to what it was, I think you're going to wait for a very long time. I think those people that are willing to adapt, understand learn and grow will create that wealth that they are seeking. And you're not alone. What happens is that previously there was the concept of passive income by owning a property, and that really is a fallacy. You have to be an active participant and choose your partners carefully. And that is why partners such as TPN and Rentmaster are becoming more relevant in people's lives, because they need to be informed and they need to have partners to understand to make the best decisions. You need to try new strategies in order to be effective. And to be successful, you need to understand that things like EFT are second option to getting your rent, to increasing your rental success. EFT should be a consequence of a debit order failing. So really question the traditional ways of owning a property and doing business. And really you will make impact and you will persevere and be successful.
Well, Shanaaz, we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Such a pleasure. And thank you so much for having me. It's always great to chat to you and your listeners.
Always a pleasure to have you, Shanaaz. Thank you very much. And that is the CEO of Rentmaster. If you want to reach out to them for their services, we have shared their website down here below. Well, that is the end of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. You can look forward to the Farming Podcast at 8 p.m. I'll be back on your screens tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. As usual, we'll be speaking to Candice Van Vey, so that's one that you do not want to miss out on tomorrow. But until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.